On March 3rd to a course on data science at the University of Washington. And I'm not going to give the talk here, rather I'm going to be talking about the talk. So I've been exploring different ways to teach Kaizen Agile concepts to science teams. And this was my latest attempt at that. So in this lecture, half of it actually was a game, and I taught the students. There was about, I would say 20, I think 20. They played the ballpoint game. I put a link to that here. Super easy game to facilitate. All you need as a facilitator is like 100 balls, and I got ball pit balls. Just ordered them. They were perfect, colorful, really light, and worked really great. Definitely worth the money just to get that. This is a game you can play a lot with teams. And so if you click at that link, you'll find the rules to that. So the ballpoint game teaches a group. It's a game to teach Kaizen, which is this idea of, let's go here. What is Kaizen? It's continuous improvement, and the idea of using these short cycles of trying something out, and then you talk about it, you experiment, try to do better, and having a metric that you can use to measure how well you're doing. In the ballpoint game, you're measuring how many balls you move through the groups using a certain rules. So really fun. They go through 5 cycles and they get better. And as a facilitator, you can either let them just go through the cycles, or you can try to get them to do a kaikaku step, where that is, so Kaizen is like slow improvements, and that kind of will naturally do that. But you can try to get them to really shake it up and try something really new, which is your kaikaku, which is your change revolution, by, telling them, you can do twice as good as that, which is true. They could, if they found one of the most, the fastest techniques that are really different than what people normally start off with. They can get through all 100. So after I did that, which took about 30 minutes, which was longer than I thought. I thought it would take like 20, and actually from like starting them off to like finishing and discussing it was a solid 30. I then went into the slides part. So the goal of this talk is just to introduce the students to the concepts around Kaizen and Agile. And there's a lot of concepts around this, and I didn't have a lot of time, so I'm just focusing on a few very specific aspects of this. And so that is this idea of using cycles, short cycles. So that was one idea. And then I also wanted to show them I wanted to talk about sort of Agile and some of the ideas around Agile, and then show them Scrum, just so they had seen it. I only had at that point 25 minutes, so not a lot of time to go into any detail. And it wasn't my goal to go into details, just to introduce them to the existence of these ideas. So one thing that I found a lot when I present these ideas to scientists, because they're really, like Kaizen is an idea coming from manufacturing, and so Toyota way, and Agile is not actually, didn't start in software, but it was really taken up by software. I think actually when Jeff Sutherland was first using these ideas, he was doing that when he was in a cancer research lab, but then moved into software. And then the software industry has really embraced this. My friends in software say that it's ubiquitous now. Like everyone uses some some variant of Scrum, more or less. However, these methods are for driving innovation and discovery, and that is really at the core of science. So these ideas are very useful also for science. So in the lecture, I wanted, as I said, I'm just sort of getting them introduced to the concepts here, and I focused on these 4 concepts: the iterative development, so working in cycles, and then as part of your cycle, delivering something early, this concept of a working product. I think that concept is the one that's really foreign to people. Reflection on workflow, again, this is within your cycle. So these are all kind of your cycling things. And then the blue one is these ideas of kind of team habits and team structures that lead to, I describe it as self-organizing, but there's sort of within these philosophies, there's a number of different like team behaviors and individual behaviors that contribute to the team working together really well and being able to get over barriers. So in the lecture, I just focused on the 2 things, introducing them to the concept of the iterative cycles, and then 2 aspects of the self-organizing teams. This in no way was covering everything about team culture in these philosophies at all. I just wanted to focus on 2 things that would be easy for them to implement either in their solo work or in their group work. And those are task boards and then FaceTime. So the idea of doing these check-ins with the group and doing really short check-ins. I didn't really talk about doing like paired programming or co-work. I focused on the check-ins. So I showed them a couple task boards. Here's one I did in GitHub project board. So just a really simple task board. The idea of, you got your backlog of tasks, what you're working on this cycle, and then what you're working on right now, and then what's done. Talked a bit about why one uses task boards. So team awareness helps you be more iterative and helps the team define these minimal, complete chunks of work. So like I said, this idea of creating a complete chunk of work, I think that's something that feels pretty foreign to teams. And I think like when I've described this in using a task board, it's a lot easier for the team to wrap their head around. I think some of my most successful workshops have been where I've organized it around a task board and had the team, figure out, hey, you got an hour, you got to create something. You're going to have to come up with some task and make a decision about what you're going to be able to demonstrate at the end of this hour or 2-hour workshop. I talked about the stand-up in this lecture in the context of keeping the task board up to date. Now, this isn't the only reason one uses a task board, but it kind of flowed naturally from my discussion of task boards. And also, this is one way that the task board is kept up to date, is during that stand-up. Now, in the lecture, as I said, my game went longer than I thought, so I really flew through Scrum. In retrospect, probably should have just dropped it, but I already had the slides together and I was kind of just going with it. So I talked about just the structure of Scrum, and I talked about it by trying to relate it back to these ideas of like cycles and task boards and stand-ups, and showing how those concepts appear in the Scrum framework. So I didn't really go through that figure. Instead, I talked about the roles that Scrum uses and why it has these roles, and again, how it does fit into the task board and coming up with the task. I talked a little bit about the role of the Scrum Master and having a facilitator, which helps the team stick to the cycles and does the stand-ups. It also acts as a coach for the team, basically. So this is, again, this is a really foreign concept for these students and in general for science teams, I've found. So like intentionally having those roles within the team is a different concept. The artifacts, the backlog of tasks, and then the tasks that you're going to complete in the current sprint. These two things feel really familiar. People are used to, creating tasks. The product increment does feel foreign. Also, the jargon that's used in Scrum, i.e. a product, that makes it feel even more forced or foreign. So I think when I give future lectures, I may change the jargon into something that'll feel more familiar to a science team. Then I presented the sprint cycle in Scrum, and I contrasted what the different roles were doing during this sprint. So it's pretty self-explanatory, kind of what is happening during the sprint. In the beginning you're planning, okay, that makes sense. Then you're working. And then the two things that are different is the team presents their work, presents this thing that they've made. In the context of science, that might be you're giving a presentation to your lab, say. And then the retrospective, now that is something really different and foreign to them. So this is the day where the team talks about their process, what they did, and how they can get better. When I give this lecture in the future, I think I have to rethink kind of how I present this. It's really hard to do it in a 1-hour slot because there's just so many concepts that are really, really different. And, I think I'd like to have a lot of time where we can be talking together about why these things are important and they can ask me questions. So like this retrospective, that just feels so foreign to teams, and they don't really understand, like, why would you do that? I didn't really talk about this. So these next slides are slides that I had in there, and I did not intend to show them, and I didn't. But I basically stopped right here. But I said, when you go into your learning, oh no, I didn't stop here. But I told them these next slides are for you to come back and look at later. So I left out a lot of big parts of this. So those are some of the big parts I left out. So this is the slide that I left on, is just giving them some next steps to learn. So if they wanted to really learn Scrum, they could go and do this video course, which I think is a really good one. And then I have a 5-minute video to show how you can do a solo sprint. In this case, I did it with GitHub project boards, but you could do it just with sticky notes. This is what that sprint looks like with the GitHub project boards. You'll notice that I did something kind of less formal here, where I actually, in the video, I talk about using an issue where I have these checkboxes, and I convert those to issues. So I was trying to show like a really kind of lightweight way to approach a solo sprint. And then I converted that to the project board. In this case, I didn't have to. Definitely, I could have worked from this, but part of the point of this was to also learn how to use GitHub project boards. Then I had some references. All right. So if you are interested in using these, trying to, teach this yourself, if any of this is useful, you can go to my webpage there. You'll find my talks and you'll find links to these slides and also links to similar other talks.